Welcome back again. I hope you've had a chance to have a think about those questions that I set in the previous video. Do these people have an eating disorder in your opinion? The answers to those questions hopefully will be clarified throughout the course, and a little bit later on I'm going to talk about how a person is diagnosed with an eating disorder, and will also clarify the signs and symptoms that may suggest this person has an eating disorder. Okay, so I'm going to keep you waiting for answers to those questions, but it was a very good exercise just to get you to begin to think about eating disorders and some of the potential signs and symptoms around you every day. Okay, I want to clarify some of the myths about eating disorders. So we often see stories in the press and on the news, for example, that talk about eating disorders and various mental health issues in general in a somewhat distorted way, in a way that isn't backed up by accurate clinical evidence. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the course. But here are some of the myths, and it's important to dispel some of those myths because that will help us to work more effectively with people who have an eating disorder if we understand the facts about eating disorders. The first myth is only teenage girls have eating disorders. Okay? Now statistically, although young females apparently may be more prone to developing an eating disorder, it certainly isn't only teenage girls who have eating disorders. Young men have eating disorders, very young children can have eating disorders, middle-aged men and women can have eating disorders, and people in the later part of their life, the elderly, also get diagnosed with eating disorders. Okay? Eating disorders, second myth, is that eating disorders are just about food. Okay? That is perhaps the primary focus because we're talking about a disorder of eating. So it might be the primary focus for the individual in many cases where they focus on what they eat. But it certainly isn't just about eating disorders. There are many other factors that come into play as well. So being obsessive over cleanliness, being obsessive about when and how to eat and what to eat, and also being obsessive about exercise and using diuretics, for example, to try and reduce weight through getting rid of water. Okay, so eating disorders are not just about food. Okay, a lot of people with eating disorders also use laxatives and other kind of food groups and medications to try and reduce weight. Okay. Myth number 3, and I think we've clarified this already, but it's important just to cover it once again, I think. Myth number 3 is that men can't have eating disorders. Men are grossly, I think, underrepresented in the statistics, but also in news coverage and news articles in relation to eating disorders. And a lot of men we know don't come forward and seek help if they have an eating disorder. Possibly because they feel a sense of embarrassment, or they feel that this impacts on their sense of masculinity, of being in control of their lives. Some men have those worries and concerns, so they don't come forward and seek help and interventions from support services. So men can and men do have eating disorders, and certainly in the United Kingdom and in the United States of America, we're seeing over the past 10-15 years or so, more men are presenting with having an eating disorder of some kind. That could be because we're more aware of eating disorders, and men are becoming more confident in seeking help and treatment for eating disorders. Okay. Myth number 4, and it's a stereotype and it's quite derogatory. Myth number 4 is that people with eating disorders are just lazy or neurotic and they should pull themselves together. It's certainly not laziness at all, because people with eating disorders work very hard, very often, to monitor all of the food groups that they intake. They monitor their weight. They often work very hard at exercise. So it certainly is not an easy option working with an eating disorder for the individual. The second part of that myth, they should pull themselves together. How many times have we heard that myth in relation to anxiety, worry, depression, or any other mental health issue? It's very unkind and it's very unhelpful, and it's not easy to pull ourselves together very often. Okay, so if anybody in the helping services that you work with mentions that myth, please do put them right. Any of these myths, actually, please do clarify the accurate reality of the situation. Myth number 5, people with eating disorders are vain. It's a sense of vanity. It's about personal appearance and looks and whatever. That can play a part. People can be obsessed with how they look and how they present, how they think they look to other people. That can play a part in eating disorders, but that doesn't really constitute vanity. Okay, so it's not about vanity, and many people with eating disorders will be at pains to point that out to you. Okay. Final myth is that you can't fully recover from an eating disorder. Now, in the past, when we didn't understand as much as we now do about eating disorders, about how they develop, and about how they can be successfully treated, it's true that there weren't many options for the client with an eating disorder to get effective help, treatment and intervention. But that certainly is changing in recent years, and now there are many clinically proven interventions and treatment programs for people with eating disorders. So we're not there yet in terms of fully understanding eating disorders and having the perfect intervention for eating disorders, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. Okay, that concludes the myths about eating disorders. Have a think about, at this point, when you pause the video, have a think about if there are any other myths that you have come across in relation to eating disorders. Okay, write those down, keep a record of them. Okay, discuss them with a friend, a colleague, or a family member. Okay, myths about eating disorders. Thank you very much. Look forward to speaking to you shortly in the next presentation. Thank you.